Hi there, I'm Amelia. I go by the Instagram handle Amelia's Stitch, and today I've made a video. I made the wide leg pants by In the Folds for Peppermint Magazine. This is the second time I've made this pattern, and I don't know why, but the experience was very different. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that I was using remnant material that I found at an op shop. There wasn't very much of it, a metre, maybe a metre and a half. So I had to sort of jigsaw it all together. But that's definitely one of my favourite parts of sewing, and I really enjoyed the process and I enjoyed editing this little video. So I hope you enjoy watching it, and please let me know because I'm really looking forward to making another one. My sewing process is definitely not perfect, and there's probably going to be a lot of people who roll their eyes at me, but I enjoy my process and I make a lot of mistakes along the way, and hey, if I can do it, anyone can do it. So enjoy, let's get into it. I found this fabric at an op shop. It's some sort of heavyweight cotton and there's only about a metre of it, but I knew she had to be pants. So I worked for ages trying to fit in the wide leg pants pattern by In the Folds for Peppermint patterns into this tiny little bit of fabric. I ended up having to use some cheap poly cotton to fill in the blanks. I used my backup fabric to create the pockets because I wouldn't have had enough of my original fabric to make the pockets as well. So you won't be able to see these black bits when it's all put together. They'll be hidden inside the pant leg. I used this same cut and paste method of fabric utilization for the pant legs because the fabric wasn't long enough for the legs. I really enjoy using secondhand fabric for this reason. It's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. The first step of this pattern is to create the pockets, starting with the pocket bag, and then to understitch that pocket bag so that it folds over really nicely. I find that unpicking things is part of my journey. Not seen here is that I also top stitched the pocket bag before I sewed on the pocket facing, just to give it that nice finished touch. So once I've got the pockets together, you just have to do a basting stitch to hold it in place, and you're good to go and finish off the pant legs before starting on the fly. Flies are definitely one of the trickiest parts of making pants, I find, but this pattern is pretty easy to follow and has some really good tips. Firstly, you have to sew the two front pant legs together just a little bit underneath where the fly will end. This helps it come together neatly. I have found though that you need 2 pairs of this fly shield for the left and the right, but maybe I'm just doing it wrong. Next, you have to pop your zipper on. I'm very excited that my zip is also secondhand from an op shop. At this point, the left-hand side of the fly is nearly finished, so you just need to do the decorative top stitch to keep it all together. Unfortunately, my zip is metal, and needles don't go over metal very well. I always end up breaking 1 or 2 needles in a big project like this. The biggest trick when attaching it to the right-hand side is trying to keep the fabric from puckering at the join. So you can't pull it over too much, you have to fold it just enough and stitch it in just the right place. Bit of a trick to it, and I didn't get it right the first time, as you can see here. So I ended up unpicking it and sewing it back on. Here you can see the second fly shield that I mentioned earlier. I've already attached it. Once I'd fixed that all up, just have to sew it down flat and your fly is finished. Ready to move on to the next step. There are darts in the back of the legs, which is very pertinent for people with booties. Darts are pretty easy. You just have to remember to tie them properly, otherwise they will look really funny at the end. Now we're getting ready to attach all the legs together, so this will actually become pants. Once you've got the side seams together, it's basically like a great big skirt. It's not until you sew the inner legs together that it actually resembles some pants. And once the legs have come together and you've finished off your seams, next comes the best bit, which is burritoing one leg into the other leg so you can sew the crotch together. And this is the first moment of truth where you can actually try on your new pants. Mine was a bit too big at the back and I had to adjust the darts and the middle seam to account for my hip to waist ratio. Once I was happy with how it fit, the next step is to attach the waistband. This pattern has the waistband in 3 separate pieces rather than one great big piece. And I think that's just to get this shape right, but I'm not sure. You'd have to ask. So the first step is that you want to put the right side of the waistband on by putting your right sides together. And I'm always a bit challenged when it comes to sizes and I'm not sure why. So I added an extra little bit to the waist. Then I realised that I hadn't lined them up properly. And it wasn't until I'd fixed all of this that I realised I'd actually put the waistband on upside down. So I had to unpick it all and start again. Moment of truth number 2, once the waistband's on you can see exactly how it's going to sit. And I discovered that it didn't fit around the crotch. I've never had to do a crotch adjustment, so this was a bit of a learning curve for me. It took about 7 goes before I got it right. Also, I feel like I should say that there was no real method to this. I did YouTube it a little bit, and I knew that I had to bring in the where the crotch met. Ended up making it too short at the back and it was too tight at my booty, but eventually I found a sweet spot just by coincidence and was ready to put it all back together. All right. Once I'd fixed my crotch, I realised that the side seams were a bit punchy, and when I sat down to look at it, I realised that part of my leg fabric was not cut on the grain, and this was because of my meterage restrictions. But once I'd fixed that, they sat nice and flat and I was happy. This shot demonstrates that I actually changed the width of the pant legs. Unlike the pattern suggests, they're not really wide leg pants, but wide-ish. I decided to adjust the size at my waist a little bit more
So you can see me here unpicking the waistband, and I titrated from the waistband into the hip, so it sat a bit snugly. I also ensured that the seams matched up, which they didn't before. The next step is getting the back of the waistband on, which is always a bit of a challenge, but is so rewarding when you get it done in the end. The first part of this is attaching the back of the waistband to the front of the waistband by sewing right sides together. Next, you have to understitch that seam to the wrong side so that when you fold it over, it creates a really flat, nice finished edge. I also cut off the old frayed edges so that when it all comes together, there'll be less bulk within the waistband. Ironing is a really important step in this waistband process because you want to ensure that the wrong side of the waistband is folded over nicely so that when you sew it all together in the next step, the raw edge is inside the waistband, so the frayed edge of the fabric is not on view. Pinning is also really important, and I actually didn't do it the first time, and I just didn't include that footage. But it is really important to make sure that you're actually catching the back of the fabric, because you stitch in the ditch in order to make the top stitching as invisible as possible. I've caught the back of my waistband in that stitch perfectly, and my waistband is now complete, and I'm ready to move on to my hem. Once I had my pant legs the same length, I just simply rolled it over, ironed it, rolled it over again, so that frayed edge that we were talking about before is encased within this seam. Because I used remnants to make these pants, the seams didn't quite match up. All the bits were different sizes, so I decided to run with that aesthetic instead of trying to match up the seams. The last step is probably the most fun, is picking a button for the waistband. My machine has a great one-step buttonhole setting. I'm still not great at using it, but it makes it so much easier. And once I'd popped the buttonhole in, all I had to do was hand stitch in my button and I was finished. So there you have it, my whitish leg pants following the In the Folds pattern for Peppermint Magazine. I hope you enjoyed watching my trial and error version of sewing.